He inherited the family business. I inherited the secrets. Guess which one survived the merger? The heels were intentional. 4 inches, bone-colored, custom-stitched with the Leclerc emblem on the sole, subtle, but visible if you knew where to look. They clicked like punctuation across the marble as I entered the ballroom, and every whisper that followed me was just loud enough to catch. She's not one of us, but she dresses like it. The annual Leclerc Foundation Gala was more theater than charity, gowns, lights, curated check writers, and pre-approved causes. Even the champagne had a script. But I didn't come for the bubbles or the praise, I came to be seen. Staff nodded, executives smiled. The board pretended I was invisible, but only because they hadn't figured out what box I belonged in. Girlfriend, that's what they called me. Not designer, not strategist, not future creative lead, even though Julian and I had discussed it more than once in private, between Paris and Milan, between the sheets and across portfolios. To the outside world, I was the elegant plus one. But behind the scenes, I was already rewriting what they thought this brand stood for. I passed Julian's mother at the foot of the staircase, porcelain smile, silver dress, the same heirloom clutch she carried every year. She offered a kiss to the air near my cheek. "Lovely gown," she said. "It's yours," I replied, letting the compliment return to sender. She blinked. I kept walking. Because if there's one thing I learned early, it's this. When you're not born into power, you learn how to dress like it, walk like it, and use silence like a scalpel. And tonight, I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to take notes. Julian buttered his toast like he was born for it. Casually, precisely. In a robe that probably cost more than my first year of rent back when I lived on boulangerie coffee and clearance notebooks. His hair was still damp from the shower, face sunlit through the terrace doors. He didn't look like a CEO in training, he looked like the son of one. "You're quiet," he said, sliding a plate across the table to me. The croissants were still warm. Of course they were, nothing in his world cooled before it was supposed to. "I'm listening," I replied. "To what?" "The way you always say things before you mean them." He smiled at that. The half-cocked, charming one, like he couldn't decide if he was about to compliment me or correct me. "I do mean it," he said. "You're going to be Mrs. Leclerc." He lifted his glass. Not champagne, orange juice, fresh, pulped. Toasted like it was already true. "And all of this," he gestured to the terrace, "the skyline, the empire built in his family's name, will be yours one day." Yours, he said it like ownership was love, like proximity was promise. Like the blood in his last name would just transfer to mine if I stayed still long enough. I watched the wind ripple through the Leclerc flags on the building across the street. Legacy. That was what he'd been born with. But I wasn't after legacy. I was after access. Because when a man offers you the world, you don't take the toast, you take the knife. Brunch was her idea. It always was. Julian's mother chose the restaurant like she chose her wardrobe, strategically timeless, with enough sparkle to distract from the undertones. We sat on a rooftop garden wrapped in glass, the skyline spilling in behind her like she owned it. She wore pearls, real but modest, and a suit the color of rosewater. Classic. Controlled. The kind that says, "I see you and I'll erase you" in the same breath. "You've been sketching again," she said, slicing into her grapefruit like it had personally offended her. Julian told me. I nodded, just concepts, color theory. Some silhouette studies. She hummed, didn't look up. "I always admired your aesthetic, very editorial, young." She said young like it was a flaw. "I actually submitted a few design notes during the resort line previews," I added, pretending I didn't already know she'd seen them. "Did you?" "I did." She took a sip of her tea. "You've got a good eye," she said, "for a stylist." There it was, not cruel, just dismissive, brutal in its precision. Stylists in her world were decorators, adorners. Pretty frames for someone else's masterpiece. Not visionaries, not creators. I smiled politely and reached for my espresso. "Better a good eye," I said, "than a blind spot." Her hand paused just a second too long, then she smiled, and we both knew the war had started. Quietly, elegantly, exactly how women like us were taught to fight. The storm came fast, not the metaphorical kind, not yet, but real thunder, real lightning. A spring downpour that soaked the Leclerc showroom's glass exterior like the sky had something to confess. I stayed late that night. The interns had gone home. The stylists too. Even the front desk girl with her stack of Elle magazines had slipped out before the rain turned sideways. Julian was in back-to-back calls with the Milan team. I wandered, at first just to stretch, then to breathe, then deeper. The archive wing wasn't off limits, not technically, but no one ever went down there without a reason. It was storage. Historical fabric swatches, retired campaign lookbooks, shelving units of old collection notes, and tax folders marked with coded stamps. I wandered past a rack of vintage samples, past the mannequins draped in last season's ghosts. A single light flickered above a hallway I didn't recognize, and I followed it. The door at the end was old, brass handle, heavy hinges. Not digital, not fingerprinted, just locked the old way. I turned the knob. It opened. Inside, cold air, dust. Cabinets built before Julian was born. I ran my fingers along the file drawers. Most were labeled by year. Some by season. Acquisitions, memos, internal comm. One drawer stuck. I tugged. It groaned, then slid open with a shudder. Inside, folders neatly stacked, mismarked, misplaced. One caught my eye. Acquisition Notes 2007. I pulled it. Opened it, and the first page wasn't an acquisition note at all. It was a settlement agreement, signed by Julian's father, stamped confidential. My pulse kicked. The next page, a scan letter. Then, numbers, payouts, wire transfers, blackmail, burial fees, a legal memo outlining the shutdown of a small French atelier. Terms vague, dates missing. I turned one more page, it was stained. Wine, blood, ink, I didn't know, but I knew this, whatever I'd found wasn't an accident. And it wasn't fashion, it was foundation, and it was rotten. The file was labeled like it had something to hide. Acquisition Notes 2007. Neutral, bland, the kind of title that wouldn't raise eyebrows in an audit, but inside. It read like a crime scene. Typed memos between Julian's father and a former co-founder, the one who'd vanished from press photos just before the company went global. Notes marked verbal only. Payments authorized through third-party accounts. A handwritten margin scrawl, handle Paris personally, she's becoming a problem. One page in particular made me freeze. A legal settlement from a firm I recognized, discreet, old money, known for keeping reputations intact. The attached NDA was airtight. 10 pages of silence, bought for just under 400,000 euros. The payout was issued to a designer named Odette Chassagny. The name rang in my bones. I flipped faster now, fingers smudging ink. There were internal summaries from a now-defunct atelier in Lyon, Delphine Studio, the same one I studied during my design theory residency. Back then, it was the holy grail of raw, original French technique, but it shuttered in 2008. Suddenly, quietly, everyone said it was financial mismanagement, but this file told a different story. The designs that launched Leclerc's breakout Renaissance collection, they weren't inspired. They were taken. Sketches dated months before the Leclerc showroom debut, nearly identical. The ruffle placements, the seaming, even the asymmetrical back panels that Julian's father once called his visionary instinct. I ran my finger along the sketch edges. They weren't legacy. They were legacy stolen. The ink on Odette's name was faded. The last note on her said, "No further contact necessary, outcome managed." I closed the folder slowly. Stood in the quiet hum of the archive room, heart loud in my chest. The Leclerc empire wasn't built on taste. It was built on theft, and I was sleeping next to the crown prince. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. I lay next to Julian in the four-poster bed with the Italian sheets and the lavender mist he insists helps him dream. He drifted off within minutes, chest rising steady, mouth barely parted, completely unaware that I had discovered the lie that made him rich. I stared at the ceiling like it might offer an answer, or absolution. It didn't. By morning, I was back in the office, eyes ringed in concealer, folder burned into my memory. The archive key had vanished from my pocket like it was never there. I said nothing, made notes, smiled when I had to, until just before lunch. That's when she came, head of compliance, pale suit, lipstick too neutral to notice. She moved like static, fast, quiet, unsettling. "Do you have a second?" she asked. Her name was Elise. I'd met her twice in passing, never in private. She led me to a meeting room I'd never seen, no windows, just soft walls and a single pitcher of water on the table. She didn't sit. "Neither did I. I'm told you were in the archive wing last night," she said. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said too quickly. "Of course not, but some of those files are restricted." "Was there a lock?" "That's not the point." I folded my arms. "Then what is?" Elise exhaled slowly. "If anyone asks, you were never down there." I tilted my head. "Is that a warning?" She smiled, polite, sterile. "It's a favor." She slid a card across the table. Her direct line, no title, then she left. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the door she'd closed behind her. The message was clear: you've seen too much. But it was the second message, the unspoken one, that stayed with me, and now we're watching you. Julian noticed by the end of the week. Not in the way most men notice, not with suspicion or sharpness. He wasn't built for paranoia. He was built for comfort, but even comfort learns how to flinch. We were on the balcony of his apartment overlooking Rue Saint-Honoré. Dusk. Wine. A jazz playlist he curated like he was auditioning for his own lifestyle magazine feature. I'd barely touched my glass. He reached over, not fast, not forceful, and traced a finger along my shoulder. "You're acting strange," he murmured, like it was a line from a script he'd half read. "I'm tired." "You don't get tired," he said, playful. "You get strategic." I turned away from his hand, just slightly, just enough. He laughed. "Ah," he said, trying to make it light. "You're mad at me. What did I forget?" He thought this was about dinner plans, or a text he didn't reply to fast enough. I didn't correct him. "I'm fine," I said, wrapping my robe tighter. "You sure?" "Of course." He kissed my hair, then pulled me close too easily. And that's when I realized he'd already started checking. Not my pulse, my phone. The lock screen had been reset. My app history cleared. Julian wasn't clever, he was entitled. The difference is subtle until someone underestimates you to your face. I let him think he was winning. Let him think I'd forgotten whatever he assumed was bothering me. But the wine stayed untouched. And I didn't go back to the balcony the next night. Because when a man starts watching you for cracks, he already knows something's broken. The boardroom smelled like citrus and preservation. Lemon oil polish. Expensive fear. We were there for the quarterly pre-brief, an internal showcase for the upcoming collection. Junior designers, senior advisors, and every member of the Leclerc inner circle gathered around a 12-seat table built for decisions, not discussion. Julian sat at the head, as always. I sat to his left. Symbolic, unofficial, deliberate. A young designer named Theo stood near the display easel, palms slightly damp, voice too soft. He was pitching a new silhouette, a reinterpretation of the 2009 archival drape, but with structural tension. I recognized it instantly, not because I'd seen it before, because I designed something almost identical in design school before I ever stepped foot in Leclerc, and he didn't know that, but Julian's father had. The room stayed quiet when Theo finished. Then the older board members chuckled. One of them muttered, "Looks like a folding chair at a dinner party." Another said, "Do we need another revival attempt?" Theo flushed. I leaned forward. "I think it's sharp," I said. "Modern, confident." One of the men raised an eyebrow. "Confidence a word." Julian chuckled along with them, a little too loud. "Let's circle back," he said smoothly. "We've got stronger concepts in the pipeline." Theo sat down, small. I stood. "No," I said, the room turned. "I think we circle forward with this." Julian's face flickered only for a second. He stood. "Let's take 5. He didn't look at me when he left the room, but 3 of the younger staff did. They stood too, and followed me out, not behind Julian, me. Because sometimes loyalty doesn't belong to the name on the building. It belongs to the person willing to say what no one else dares. The file hadn't moved. Same drawer, same fake label, same invisible weight. I pulled it again late that night, when Julian was out at a Leclerc Foundation dinner and the penthouse was mine alone. The pages still smelled like dust and age and other people's panic. This time I read slower. There was one name that kept surfacing in memos, in payout records, in half-redacted notes from external counsel. Odette Chassagny. I knew that name. Everyone who studied fashion in France did. She wasn't famous, not exactly. not commercial. But she was mythic, the kind of talent whispered about in studio corners, revered in low-resolution Pinterest boards where fashion students pinned the silhouettes they'd never be allowed to make. And she was gone, disappeared after Delphine's studio closed. No lawsuits, no press interviews, just a vanished woman and a mountain of whispers, but the file had her name, and more importantly, her daughter's. Margit Chassagny mentioned once. Briefly, no payout, no contact information, just a note, daughter works in legal. Non-issue if unprovoked, I closed the file. Opened my laptop. 3 hours later, I found her. Margit Chassagny, paralegal, mid-30s. Based in Lyon, 2 cities away, no social media. No press. Just a firm website with a grayscale headshot and an inbox I stared at for 15 full minutes before typing, "Hi Margit, you don't know me. But I think your mother tried to protect something. I'd like to help you find out what it was." I hit send, closed my laptop, and sat in the dark with the weight of what came next. Because the moment she replied, this wouldn't be curiosity anymore, it would be war. Margit replied in under an hour. The message was short. Thursday, 2 p.m. Café Aube Lyon, ask for a window seat. Bring proof, no sign-off. No pleasantries, just coordinates. I told Julian I had a client consult in Marseille. He barely looked up from his espresso machine. The train ride was quiet. I stared out at fields and fog and thought about all the things Margit might already know and what it would mean if I was the first to show her. Café Aube was tucked between a flower shop and a cobbler's storefront that smelled like cedar and ink. The kind of place built on history, the kind of place Odette might have loved. She was already seated when I arrived. Mid-30s, black turtleneck, no makeup, eyes sharp enough to slice. I sat across from her. Placed the file on the table, flat. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, how did you find it? Wrong drawer. And you thought of me. I thought of justice. She studied me, not with awe, with calculation. My mother, she said, tapping a chipped fingernail against the folder, died in 2014. Stroke. 2 months after being evicted from the flat that once doubled as her studio. I didn't speak. She wrote letters, Margit continued. To journalists, to lawyers, to design schools. Everyone said the same thing, Leclerc was untouchable, and she didn't have the proof. Her voice didn't break, but something in her hands did. She opened the file, flipped slowly, recognized things. Photocopies of sketches, her mother's handwriting in the corners. Fabric swatch lists, payout ledgers, the NDA, and finally the memo calling Odette unmanageable. Margit exhaled like a ghost left her lungs. They called her unstable, she said. Said she was trying to ruin a legacy, that she couldn't handle being overlooked. She wasn't overlooked, I said. She was erased. Margit looked up, her eyes weren't wet, but they were no longer calm. What are you going to do with it? She asked. I didn't hesitate. I'm going to make sure her name comes back louder than theirs ever will. And Margit smiled. The kind of smile that only happens when grief finally has a weapon. He was waiting for me when I got home, not pacing, not shouting, just sitting on the velvet settee in the front hallway, legs crossed, blazer still buttoned like he hadn't moved since he found the file. The pages were scattered across the coffee table. Every memo, every payout, every signature. Julian didn't speak at first, just watched me as I closed the door behind me. The silence was so loud I could hear the weight of it shift. Finally, he asked, "Where did you find it?" "Wrong drawer," I said, echoing the truth. "Just not all of it." He exhaled slowly. No panic, no rage, just precision. "If you love me," he said, "you won't say anything." That's when I realized something important. Julian didn't doubt the documents. He didn't ask if they were real. He didn't try to explain or deny or offer a single reason why his father's empire had been built on theft. Because he knew, he'd always known. He just assumed I would be one of the women who chose comfort over consequence. He stood then, gently smoothing one of the pages like it needed to be pressed back into silence. "This would destroy everything," he said. "It should," I answered. He shook his head, smiling like I was naive. "You don't get it," he said. "This company isn't just a brand, it's an institution. It's art, it's stolen," I snapped. The word cracked the room. He stopped smiling. "You have no idea what it took to build this," he said, voice dropping. "What my father sacrificed, what I sacrificed. I stepped forward slow. No, I said. You don't get it. I haven't even started yet. I scanned the file that night. Page by page, deliberate, quiet, like a ritual. I wore gloves, closed every curtain, disconnected from Wi-Fi. Used a burner laptop I bought last year when I first sensed something about Julian's calendar didn't match his words. The folder I created was plain. No labels, no dates, just a single word in the file name, return. I uploaded everything to a cloud drive tied to an email no one could trace. Not even Julian. Then I opened a fresh message. No body, no subject, just an attachment and an address. Investigations@leclerwatch.org. It was a watchdog site, anonymous tips, whistleblower protection. I used to laugh at it. Julian called them conspiracy hobbyists. Now they were going to be the first crack in the marble. I hovered over send, no music played, no thunder cracked, just a finger on a key, click. The upload bar flashed once, and it was done. No second guessing, no delay, no tears, because this wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. Correction of theft, of legacy, of silence. I closed the laptop, slid it back into the drawer with the gloves, and stared at my reflection in the black screen. The woman who sent that file looked exactly like me, but she wasn't the fiancée anymore. She was something sharper, something final. The fallout started with a headline. Leclerc Empire built on stolen designs, whistleblower drops bombshell archive. Then the cascade began. Journalists, analysts, fashion critics once too timid to question the brand now dissected every hem, every stitch, every inspired silhouette from the last 15 years. The file spread like perfume in a crowded room, slow at first, then inescapable. Julian came home furious, not firestorm furious, controlled burn furious. The kind where every sentence starts quiet and ends sharp. You know what this would do to my family? He said, standing over the dining table like it owed him something. To my mother. I didn't answer. You think you're exposing injustice? He spat. You're torching heritage, killing something beautiful. I stood across from him, unmoving, unapologetic. I'm correcting the credits. He laughed, bitter, brittle. This isn't justice, it's sabotage. No, I said, it's authorship. His voice rose, you're a traitor. And I smiled, just a little. Funny, I said, stepping closer. I haven't even started yet. That was when he saw it, not the file me. He saw the part of me he never asked about, the part that didn't wear silk for decoration, the part that didn't need his name to have value, the part that would never again ask for permission. Julian's face changed. Not fear. Not fury, recognition. And that's when I knew he'd already lost. Not just the company, me. The press storm hit like a tidal wave, but I was already dry. The morning after the leak, Leclerc stock dropped 12%. The board called an emergency session before sunrise. 3 senior advisors stepped away for personal reasons. A reporter camped outside the Rue Cambon flagship before the mannequins inside had time to change outfits. Julian denied everything. Of course he did. At a carefully lit press conference, he stood behind a navy podium, jaw tight, voice smooth. We are aware of the false allegations circulating. My family built this company with integrity. We will cooperate with any inquiry, because we have nothing to hide. The statement was crisp, practiced, written by the same people who once buried Odette's silence in a €400,000 wire. His mother released a letter to shareholders 2 hours later. All grace. All poise, all deflection. She called the story a deeply hurtful fabrication, praised the company's generational excellence, and emphasized their commitment to moving forward. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, legal was hemorrhaging. The head of archival resigned. The original co-founder, the one who'd vanished from the history books, was now unavailable for comment. And the fashion world, they smelled blood. Features ran hourly. The Leclerc lie. Design theft or flawed genius. The woman behind the whistle. They didn't name me, but they wanted to. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Anonymous numbers. Blocked calls. One message came from an unlisted sender. You should have stayed in your place. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it because I had. And that place was above them now. It happened at lunch, not a meeting, not a call, just lunch. A table for 4 in a discreet back corner of Café Delphine, where Leclerc executives liked to whisper between espresso shots and overpriced salads. The new compliance officer, the one brought in after the original team quietly dissolved, sat across from me, sleeves rolled, watch glinting. He didn't make small talk, didn't fake warmth, just said it plainly, "We know who leaked it." The air between us didn't move. I sipped my water, waited, he didn't press, didn't accuse. Just leaned back in his chair and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin like we were talking about wine imports, not industrial sabotage. "Is that a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He tilted his head. "Only if we pretend it didn't happen." Silence, then he added, "No one's moving to act, yet." That was the moment I realized. They were scared, not of what I'd done, but of what else I might have. I didn't smile, didn't nod. Just folded my hands in my lap like I'd been born at this table. "You know," he said, standing and adjusting his jacket, "I always thought you were just the girlfriend." I looked up at him. "I am," I said, "just not his." He left without paying, and I sat there for a while longer, watching the staff avoid eye contact, watching the door stay closed a few seconds too long after every guest entered. They knew, and they weren't sure what to do with me now. Because the thing about a woman who survives exposure is that she can't be threatened by the light. Julian left the country on a Thursday, no press alert, no farewell dinner. Just a grainy photo of him at Charles de Gaulle, boarding a private jet with a leather duffel and sunglasses too dark for the morning light. The caption came from a junior correspondent on fashion Twitter. "Julian Leclerc resigns for health reasons." A source close to the family says he'll be spending time in Geneva. Geneva, of course, where Legacy goes to recover and rebrand. The official company statement followed within the hour. Full of platitudes, "We thank Julian for his dedication to the brand. We wish him strength and privacy during this time. The board will assume temporary leadership." Temporary, but we both knew what that meant. I watched the footage from my phone in bed. No champagne, no music, just a croissant growing stale on the plate beside me. Julian didn't text, didn't call, didn't beg me to come, because we were past that. He knew he couldn't outrun what I had done or what I was still capable of. I turned off the screen and stared out the window at the skyline we once called ours. There was something oddly gentle about the silence that followed. Not relief, not grief, just space. Like the Empire had exhaled and finally realized who it had been suffocating. The call came on a Sunday. No caller ID, just a tone that split the stillness of my apartment like a blade. I almost didn't answer, but I did. A man's voice. Polished, older, the kind of accent trained by boarding schools and boardrooms, familiar only in the way power always is. "We need a new face," he said. I didn't speak. "Someone clean," he continued. "Unentangled but recognizable. You're already halfway there." Still, I said nothing. He let the pause hang, then added, "You've shown initiative, control, loyalty to the brand, not the boy. That matters." I leaned against the kitchen counter. I wasn't aware the board had made a decision. "We haven't," he replied, "but decisions are shaped long before votes." He gave me a time, a floor, a dress code. Then he hung up, no name. No congratulations. Just a door opening that had once been bolted shut from the inside. I stood in the silence that followed, not shocked, not flattered, prepared, because I wasn't chosen out of admiration. I was chosen because I knew the truth and wasn't afraid to let it bleed. And now they needed someone who could hold a torch and not burn the house down. Not yet. The announcement came on a Tuesday. It was discreet, of course, as all power shifts are when they're real. No press conference. No camera flash, just an email to the executive team, then a quiet leak to WWD. Leclerc Group welcomes new leadership. In an unexpected pivot, longtime insider and former creative advisor steps in as acting CEO. They didn't use my full name, just the initials, just enough to whisper, not shout. Inside the boardroom, it was champagne and controlled applause. The men who once smiled through me now stood as I entered. One pulled out my chair. Another made a joke about fresh eyes at the helm. I didn't laugh. I folded my hands on the table. The same table where they once told me I had an eye for styling. Where they cut off my suggestions mid-sentence. Where Julian interrupted my defense of a junior designer and no one blinked. Now, they waited for me to speak. I said nothing at first. Just opened the folder in front of me and laid out the restructured product plan, clean, direct, radically transparent. The head of PR shifted in his seat. The CFO raised his brows, but they didn't object, because the woman they once ignored had become the woman they needed, not because she was likable, not because she was merciful, because she survived the fire they tried to light beneath her and walked out holding the matchbook. The interview was supposed to be soft, a glossy feature for a design magazine that had always fawned over the Leclerc name. They sent a junior editor, someone fresh-faced with carefully rehearsed questions and a shaky smile. We sat in a minimalist showroom surrounded by fabrics I helped resurrect from the rubble. She asked about vision, about reinvention, about what it meant to step into legacy. I gave her polished answers, about transparency, about honoring the past without living in it, about trusting your instincts even when the world tells you to stay silent. She nodded, wrote quickly. Then, just as the photographer adjusted the lens, just as the light hit my cheek just right, she looked up from her notes and asked, "Off the record, did you love him?" It wasn't scripted, wasn't safe, but I answered anyway. I smiled the way I've learned to smile, sharp, camera-ready, unshakable, and said, "The brand survived, but not all of us did." Click, the shutter snapped, and in that sound I heard it, the end, the beginning, and the reminder that some women don't get legacy. We become it. That night I walked the showroom alone. No stylists, no assistants, no Julian, just rows of garments, refitted, reattributed, finally named for the women who inspired them. A tag near the front read, Odette Fall Reclaim Collection. It wasn't decorative, it was deliberate. The glass reflected my silhouette back to me, heels steady, chin high, the kind of woman I was never supposed to become in their world. The kind of woman they'd only ever imagined seated beside power, not inside it. Julian's mother sent flowers that morning. White lilies. No note. I left them in the hallway, unopened. The board had sent a bottle of champagne, the kind that used to arrive only when men made deals. It still sat on the marble, cork untouched, because this wasn't a celebration. It was a confirmation. Everything they tried to hide had been dragged into the light. And what remained wasn't the scandal. It was me. I inherited the secrets they buried. I reshaped the ruin they built. And now, the legacy they once tried to protect by silencing women like Odette, it bore my signature. Julian inherited the name, but I inherited the truth. And in the end, only one of us survived the merger. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I love you all.